My name is Thomas Morgan, and I'm telling you this story from my weathered cabin in Colorado Territory, 53 years after it happened. The desert wind still howls through these mountains, carrying memories that cut deeper than any Apache blade ever could, and sweeter than any honey I've ever tasted. It was the scorching summer of 1847, when I made the mistake that would destroy my old life and create something far more beautiful than I ever imagined possible. I was 22 years old, all lean muscle and foolish pride, working as a ranch hand for Colonel Webb just outside Santa Fe. The sun had baked my skin brown, and my hands were calloused from years of breaking wild horses and mending endless miles of fence line. Colonel Webb was a hard man, who'd carved his fortune out of cattle and his reputation out of crushing anyone foolish enough to cross him. He'd come west after the Mexican War with dreams of building a cattle empire, and he didn't much care who he stepped on to get there. His ranch house sat like a fortress on a hill overlooking thousands of acres of grazing land, and from his front porch he could survey his kingdom like some kind of feudal lord. But it was his daughter, Isabella, who made working for that tyrant bearable. She was the most beautiful woman I'd ever laid eyes on. Golden hair that caught sunlight like spun wheat dancing in the breeze, skin like fresh cream, and eyes as blue as mountain lakes in springtime. When she walked, it was like watching poetry in motion, and when she smiled, the whole world seemed to brighten around her. The trouble was, Isabella was already promised to Lieutenant Marcus Stone, a cavalry officer from some wealthy family back in Virginia. Stone was everything the colonel wanted in a son-in-law: family money that went back generations, military connections that could open doors in Washington, and the kind of weak backbone that would never challenge the colonel's authority. He was a pale, soft man who looked like he'd never done an honest day's work in his life. With hands that were smoother than most women's, Isabella despised him from the moment they met. And maybe that's what first drew us together. We understood what it felt like to be trapped by other people's expectations, to have our futures decided by men who cared more about money and social standing than human happiness. Our secret meetings started innocent enough, or at least that's what I told myself. I'd help her with her spirited mare, a beautiful chestnut Arabian that had more fire in her than most men I knew. Isabella would appear at the stables in the late afternoon when the heat was starting to break, wearing simple riding clothes that somehow made her look even more beautiful than her fancy dresses. We'd talk about books she'd read. She had a whole library in her room filled with novels and poetry that opened up worlds I'd never imagined. She told me about her dreams of seeing California, maybe San Francisco, where she'd heard women could own businesses and make their own decisions. I shared stories about my childhood in Missouri, about learning to ride before I could properly walk, about the freedom of sleeping under stars with nothing but a horse and the open trail ahead. But innocence has a way of burning up when two hearts get too close to the flame. And by late summer, we were meeting not just to talk, but to steal kisses behind the hay bales and hold hands. While walking along the creek that ran through the back pasture, those stolen moments felt like the most real part of my entire life. The night we were caught changed everything forever. We'd been planning our escape for weeks. Isabella had slowly packed her most precious belongings, and I'd been saving every penny of my wages to buy supplies for the journey west. I had two of the colonel's fastest horses waiting behind the stable, saddled and ready with enough provisions to get us to California. We should have left that afternoon, but we were young and foolish and thought we had time for one last kiss. One final moment to hold each other before facing the unknown dangers of the trail ahead. We were behind the old barn, wrapped in each other's arms, when Colonel Webb's voice cut through the darkness like a whip crack. "Step away from my daughter, you worthless saddle tramp." I'll never forget the look in his eyes when I turned round. Not just anger, though there was plenty of that, but the cold calculation of a man who'd found the perfect opportunity to destroy someone completely. Lieutenant Stone stood behind him with his hand on his pistol, but I could see the relief in his pale face. He didn't want to marry Isabella any more than she wanted to marry him. But he was too much of a coward to break the engagement himself. "You want my daughter so badly," the colonel said, his voice deadly quiet in the desert night. "Let's see just how much you're willing to sacrifice for her love." I thought he might shoot me right there, or have me arrested and hanged for attempted kidnapping. Instead, he had something much more creative in mind, something that would torture both Isabella and me far more effectively than a simple bullet. The next morning, I found myself chained hand and foot in the back of a supply wagon, heading deep into Apache territory with 3 other prisoners. The colonel had made a deal with Chief Nolnish of the Mescalero Apache trading goods, weapons, and prisoners for safe passage through their lands for his cattle drives. It was an arrangement that benefited both sides, but I was about to become living currency in a transaction I never agreed to. As Santa Fe disappeared behind clouds of dust kicked up by our wagon wheels, I thought my life was over. I'd heard all the stories about Apache captives, the torture, the slavery, the slow deaths under the merciless desert sun. What I never expected, what no one had ever told me in all those campfire tales, was that I was about to discover what real love looked like. The Apache camp sat hidden in a valley where red sandstone cliffs rose like cathedral walls toward an endless blue sky. Ancient cottonwoods provided blessed shade from the brutal sun, and a clear stream meandered through the center of the settlement, creating an oasis that seemed impossible in this harsh landscape. It was nothing like the savage encampment I'd imagined from all the stories told around army, campfires, and ranch house dinner tables. The lodges were arranged in careful patterns that seemed to follow the natural flow of the land, and everywhere I looked, I saw evidence of a sophisticated society. Children played organized games while learning important skills. Women worked together on intricate beadwork and pottery, and men crafted weapons and tools with an attention to detail that would have impressed any craftsman. Chief Nolnish was a man in his 60s, with steel-grey hair braided with eagle feathers and eyes that seemed to see straight through to your soul. He moved with the quiet dignity of someone who'd earned respect through wisdom and strength rather than fear and intimidation. When he examined us for prisoners, it felt like he was reading our entire life stories in our faces. The other 3, men, horse thieves, and drifters who'd been caught stealing cattle, were immediately led away to work with the horse herds on the outskirts of camp. But when Chief Nolnish looked at me, something different happened. He studied my face for a long moment, then spoke in perfect, unaccented English that surprised me. "You," he said, "you carry different pain than the others. Not fear of death, but fear of living without something precious to you." I was assigned to work with his son, Aiyana, whose name meant he fights. Aiyana was about my age, maybe 25, with the powerful shoulders of a man who'd spent years hunting elk in the mountains and the easy laugh of someone who'd never known real cruelty. His English was nearly as good as his father's, learned from years of trading with Mexican and American settlers, but it was his sister who would change everything. I thought I knew about love, honor, and what it meant to truly belong somewhere. I appeared like a vision on my second day in camp, bringing me food and fresh water while I worked repairing horse tack under Ahiga's watchful supervision. Her name meant eternal blossom, and she had the kind of natural beauty that didn't need fancy dresses or elaborate hairstyles to take your breath away. She moved with the unconscious grace of someone completely comfortable in her own skin. And when she looked at me, I didn't see pity or disgust in her intelligent dark eyes. I saw genuine curiosity about who I was beneath the surface. The first weeks in camp were harder than breaking the wildest mustangs I'd ever encountered. Every morning I woke expecting to be worked to death or tortured for entertainment. But instead, I found myself learning that everything I'd been taught about Apache people was not just wrong, but deliberately twisted to justify the Army's brutal campaigns against them. These weren't the bloodthirsty savages of newspaper stories and government propaganda. They were a proud, ancient people fighting desperately to protect their homeland from an endless tide of settlers, soldiers, and fortune seekers who saw the vast beauty of the Southwest as nothing more than empty land waiting to be claimed. They had complex laws, rich traditions, and a deep spiritual connection to the natural world that put most white communities to shame. He became my teacher in everything from language to hunting techniques, and gradually, almost without my noticing, he became my friend. He taught me to track deer across stone ground that showed no obvious signs, to read weather patterns in the behavior of birds and the smell of the wind, and most importantly, to understand the Apache code of honor that governed every aspect of their lives. A man is measured not by what he can take from others, he told me one evening as we watched the sunset paint the canyon walls gold and crimson, but by what he gives freely, and by how he treats those who have less power than himself. Instead of the cramped, filthy prison I'd expected, I was given a small but comfortable lodge at the edge of camp. It had everything I needed: a good sleeping area, space for my few possessions, and even a small fire pit for cooking. The lodge was simple but well made, and I realized it was actually better than the bunkhouse I'd shared with other ranch hands back at Colonel Webb's place. Every morning, Aiyana would appear with food, not just the basic rations I assumed. Prisoners would receive, but carefully prepared meals with flavors and combinations I'd never experienced. There would be venison cooked with wild herbs, cornbread made with blue corn that tasted like nothing I'd ever had, and stews that somehow managed to be both hearty and delicate at the same time. She would linger after delivering the meals, ostensibly to collect the empty bowls, but really to teach me words in Apache, and listen to my stories about life in the world beyond the desert. Her English was fluent, but accented in a way that made even ordinary words sound like music. And she had an intelligence that put most educated men I'd known to shame. One evening, about 2 months into what I'd stopped thinking of as captivity, I finally worked up the courage to ask her the question that had been bothering me since my first day in camp. "Aiyana, why are you being so kind to me? I'm supposed to be a prisoner here." She was quiet for a long moment, staring into the small fire that crackled between us. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but certain. "My father saw something in you the day you arrived that the others didn't have. He said you were a man who had loved truly and completely, even when it brought you nothing but pain. True love is sacred to our people, Thomas, even when it leads to suffering." That's when I began to understand that I wasn't really a prisoner anymore, if I ever truly had been. I was slowly, carefully being invited to become something I'd never expected. A member of this community that had accepted me despite everything. I'd been taught about the impossibility of crossing the lines that supposedly divided our peoples. Summer burned itself out and gave way to autumn, and the desert transformed into something that took my breath away every single morning. The cottonwoods along the stream turned brilliant gold, the sagebrush took on silver highlights, and the red rock cliffs seemed to glow with their own inner fire. When the sun hit them just right, I'd completely stopped thinking about escape, stopped dreaming about somehow making my way back to Santa Fe and the life I'd lost there. The truth was, that old life felt like it belonged to someone else entirely, and Isabella had become like a character from a book I'd read long ago, important at the time, but no longer real in any meaningful way. Aiyana and I had grown close, in a way that surprised both of us. Our conversations had evolved from simple language, lessons to deep discussions about everything from philosophy to dreams for the future. She would tell me Apache legends that went back countless generations, stories that explained not just how the world was created, but why it worked the way it did. I shared what I knew about the outside world, not just the facts, but what it felt like to live in a society where everything seemed to be changing so fast that people barely had time to catch their breath. Our friendship had deepened into something more complex and beautiful than anything I'd experienced with Isabella. This wasn't the desperate, grasping need I'd mistaken for love back in Santa Fe. This was something that grew slowly and naturally, like the cottonwoods that deepened their roots year by year until they could survive any drought or flood. One crisp morning in late October, Chief Nonish called me to his lodge for what I assumed would be another work assignment. Instead, I found him sitting with the tribal elders around a small ceremonial fire, their faces serious but not unfriendly. The ceremony that followed was conducted entirely in Apache, but I'd learned enough of the language to understand that. They were discussing my future in terms that would have seemed impossible just months before. "Thomas Morgan," the chief said finally, using my full name with the formal tone reserved for important occasions. "You have proven yourself worthy of our trust and respect. You work hard without complaint. You have learned our ways with genuine respect rather than mere curiosity, and you have brought honor to our community through your behavior." He paused, studying my face in the flickering firelight. "I offer you a choice that few outsiders have ever been given. You may return to your people with our blessing and safe passage, or you may stay here and become truly one of us, with all the rights and responsibilities that brings." The offer hit me like lightning striking clear sky. In all my months in the camp, I'd never imagined this possibility. But before I could find words to respond, Chief Nolnish continued speaking. And what he said next changed everything. "There is something else you should know before you make your decision. My daughter Aiyana has spoken to me about her feelings. She wishes to know if you would consider accepting her as your wife, should you choose to make your life among us." My heart began thundering like a herd of mustangs running across hard ground. I looked around the circle of elders, each face serious and dignified, waiting for my response to an offer that represented not just personal happiness, but a complete transformation of identity. These people, who had every historical reason to hate and distrust me, were offering me not just freedom, but a place in their family and community. That evening, I found Aiyana by the stream where she often went to think and pray. The moon was nearly full, turning the flowing water into liquid silver, and her long hair caught the light like black silk touched with starlight. She was throwing small pebbles into the water, each one creating expanding circles that caught and reflected the moonlight. "Did you know your father was going to ask me that today?" I said, settling beside her on the smooth rocks. She nodded without looking at me, her attention apparently focused on selecting the perfect stones from the collection at her feet. I asked him to make the offer, but only if it was truly what you wanted for yourself. I won't trap you with kindness the way your old life trapped you with obligation and duty. I reached out and took her hands, surprised, as always, by how small and strong they were. Her fingers were stained from working with dyes and beadwork, and there were small calluses from the countless tasks that filled her days. But they were the most beautiful hands I'd ever held. Aiyana, I need you to understand something important. I came here thinking I knew what love was supposed to feel like. But what I felt for Isabella back in Santa Fe, that was the desperate need of a young man who confused desire with love, who mistook the thrill of forbidden romance for something deeper and more lasting. She finally looked up at me, and I could see uncertainty in her eyes despite her brave words. What I feel for you is completely different, I continued. It's not desperate or grasping or afraid. It's like coming home to a place I never knew I was looking for. Like discovering that all my life I'd been only half awake, and now I'm finally seeing the world clearly. She smiled then, the first truly joyful expression I'd seen from her since this conversation began. Then you'll stay with us. You'll stay with me. I'll stay, I said, meaning it with every fiber of my being. Not just for you, though I love you more than I ever thought possible. I'll stay because this place, these people, this way of life, it's shown me who I could become instead of just who I used to be. The wedding ceremony took place 3 days later under a canopy of stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. It was unlike anything from my old world, a celebration that connected us, not just to each other, but to the land we lived on, to the ancestors who had walked these paths before us, and to the future generations who would follow in our footsteps. The entire community participated in ways that made it clear this wasn't just about two people making promises to each other, but about all of us committing to support and strengthen the bonds that held our society together. There was singing that made my heart soar, dancing that seemed to connect us to the very heartbeat of the earth, and rituals that transformed us from two separate people into something new and stronger. As Aiyana and I danced around the ceremonial fire, our hands joined and our hearts beating in perfect rhythm. I caught sight of Chief Knowledge watching us with deep satisfaction. Later, after most of the celebration had wound down and people were beginning to drift back to their lodges, he pulled me aside for a private conversation. The white soldiers who raid our villages and burn our homes, he said, his voice thoughtful rather than bitter. They think they demonstrate strength through destruction and domination. But you, Thomas, have shown us real strength, the courage to let your old self die completely so that a better, truer man could be born in his place. Those words stayed with me long after our wedding night, long after Aiyana and I had begun building our life together as husband and wife. I finally understood that my time in this hidden valley wasn't just about finding love. It was about discovering who I was meant to be all along. The next 5 years passed like a beautiful dream that I never wanted to wake up from. Aiyana wasn't just my wife in the legal sense. She became my partner in every aspect of life, my teacher in wisdom I'd never learned from books, and my closest friend in ways I hadn't known were possible between a man and woman. Together, we built a life that bridged completely different worlds. I learned traditional Apache crafts that had been passed down through countless generations, how to weave baskets strong enough to carry water, how to make bows that could bring down an elk at 50 yards, how to read the signs that told you where to find healing plants in the seemingly barren desert landscape. At the same time, I shared my knowledge of horses and ranching techniques with the younger men in our community, teaching them methods for breaking wild horses that caused less trauma to the animals and produced better, more reliable mounts. My skills with leatherwork and metal repairs made me valuable in ways that had nothing to do with my origins as a white captive. But the greatest gift of those years came in the spring of 1850, when Aiyana gave birth to our son. We named him Little Wolf, and watching her become a mother revealed depths of strength and wisdom in her that I'd never fully appreciated before. She had an intuitive understanding of what our child needed, not just to survive, but to thrive as a person who could navigate between the Apache world and the rapidly changing landscape of the American Southwest. She raised Little Wolf to be proud of both sides of his heritage, teaching him English and Apache with equal care, sharing stories from both cultures that would help him understand his place in a world that didn't always welcome people who couldn't be easily categorized. When he was old enough to understand, she explained that his father had been born white but had chosen to become Apache through love and commitment rather than accident of birth. Our small lodge expanded into a comfortable home as our family grew and prospered. We added rooms for our growing household, and Aiyana created one of the most beautiful gardens in the entire valley, growing both traditional Apache food plants and crops I remembered from my childhood in Missouri. Little Wolf played among the corn stalks and bean vines, learning the cycles of planting and harvesting that connected us to the land in the most fundamental ways possible. But the outside world, the world of territorial governments and military, campaigns and manifest destiny, wouldn't leave us in peace forever. Reports reached our valley regularly about increased tensions between Apache bands and the growing number of soldiers and settlers streaming into the Southwest. The Mexican-American War had ended with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which meant that our traditional homeland was now officially part of the United States. With all the complications that brought, the Army was under increasing pressure from Washington to force all Apache people onto designated reservations, lands that were invariably the least desirable and least productive in the entire territory. Raids and counter-raids were escalating on both sides, and innocent people were dying in a spiral of violence that seemed to have no end in sight. One crisp autumn day in 1852, everything changed when a cavalry patrol appeared at the mouth of our valley flying a white flag of truce. The commanding officer, sitting stiffly upright on a bay gelding that looked like it had been ridden hard for several days, was someone I recognized immediately. Lieutenant Marcus Stone, the same man Isabella had been forced to marry after my disappearance. Thomas Morgan, he called out in a voice that carried clearly across the camp. I've come to inform you that you're still wanted by territorial authorities for kidnapping a white woman and consorting with hostile Indians. Chief Nomnish stepped forward with the unshakable dignity that had made him a respected leader for more than 2 decades. Despite the obvious insult in Stone's words, his voice remained calm and measured when he replied, "This man is under the protection of the Mescalero Apache people. He has committed no crimes in our territory, and he is here by his own free choice as a member of our community." Stone's face flushed red above his military collar. He's committed the crime of forgetting his race and his duty to Christian civilization, old man. And you people have committed the crime of harboring a known fugitive from justice. But then something happened that I never could have anticipated in 1,000 years. A woman stepped out from behind the line of cavalry soldiers, and even though she was older now, changed by 5 years of marriage and life as an army officer's wife. I recognized her immediately. "Hello, Thomas," Isabella said quietly, her voice carrying a weariness that hadn't been there when we were young and foolish together. "Isabella," I replied, feeling Aiyana's strong hand slip into mine, steady and reassuring in a way that told me she wasn't threatened by this ghost from my past. "I have to say, I'm surprised to see you here." She looked older than her years, with lines around her eyes that spoke of disappointment and compromise. And there was a hardness in her expression that hadn't been there when she was the Colonel's pampered daughter dreaming of escape to California. "I asked Marcus to let me come along when we heard the rumors that you were still alive," she said. "Father told everyone you'd been killed by Indians, but stories reached Santa Fe about a white man living peacefully among the Mescalero. I needed to see for myself what had become of you." "As you can see," I said, gesturing toward our lodge, toward little Wolf playing with other children nearby, toward the life Aiyana and I had built together. "I'm very much alive and happier than I ever imagined possible." Isabella's eyes took in everything: the well-ordered camp, the obvious prosperity and contentment of the people around us, the way Aiyana stood beside me with quiet confidence, the beautiful child who clearly belonged to both of us. I could see her trying to reconcile what she was seeing with everything she'd been taught about savage Indians and the impossibility of whites living successfully among them. "Is this your family?" she asked, and there was something in her tone that might have been envy. "Yes," I said, and I could hear the deep pride in my own voice. "This is my wife, Aiyana, and our son, little Wolf. They're the most precious things in my world." Isabella was quiet for a long moment, studying Aiyana with an expression I couldn't quite read. When she spoke again, her voice was different, softer, more honest than the careful words she'd been using since she arrived. "Thomas, I want you to know that I never blamed you for what happened between us. And I want you to understand something else. What we had back then, what we thought was love, it wasn't real. We were two young people trying to escape from situations we didn't want to face, using each other as a way to avoid dealing with our own problems." She turned to look at Lieutenant Stone, who was growing increasingly red-faced as this conversation continued in directions he obviously hadn't anticipated. "Marcus, there's no fugitive here, just a man who found where he truly belongs." Stone's voice cracked with outrage. "Isabella, you can't be serious. This man abandoned his own people, his own race. He's living like a savage." "No, Marcus," she said, with more firmness than I'd ever heard from her. "He found his real family. Something I wish I'd been brave enough to do when I had the chance. The patrol left that afternoon without taking anyone, but we all understood that they'd be back eventually. The pressure on all Apache tribes was growing stronger every year, and our peaceful valley wouldn't stay hidden from the expanding reach of the territorial government forever." That night, as Aiyana and I lay under our blankets with little Wolf sleeping peacefully between us, she asked me the question I'd been dreading. "Do you ever regret the choice you made? Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if you'd stayed in your old world?" I thought about her question seriously before answering, because she deserved nothing less than complete honesty. How could I regret the best decision I ever made? I finally said, "Aiyana, you didn't just become my wife when we married. You became my queen, my teacher, my guide to becoming the man I was always meant to be. You showed me what real love looks like, not the desperate grasping I mistook for love when I was young, but the daily choice to see the best in each other and build something beautiful together." She smiled in the darkness, and I felt her hand find mine under the blankets. And you, my husband, taught me that love isn't about possession or control or trying to change someone into what you think they should be. Real love is about freedom. The freedom to choose each other every single day, even when the whole world tells us we're wrong. We did eventually have to leave our beautiful valley when the cavalry returned in force 2 years later, part of a major campaign to relocate all Apache people to designated reservations. But we left together as a family, traveling the difficult trail to California where other mixed families had found acceptance in gold. Rush communities that cared more about a man's character and work ethic than his bloodline or the color of his skin. The journey was hard, especially with little Wolf still so young. But we made it safely to a small town in the Sierra Nevada foothills, where I found work as a horse trainer, and Aiyana became known as the best healer in 3 counties. We built a new life there, had 2 more children, and became respected members of a community that judged us by our contributions rather than our origins. If you're still watching this story, I hope you'll take a moment to leave a comment about what it meant to you. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and give this video a thumbs up to help other people find these stories about love conquering the barriers that society puts between us. I'm telling you this story now, at the age of 75, because my beloved Aiyana passed away last winter after 53 years of marriage, and I want the world to know about the woman who saved my soul and showed me what it meant to truly love someone. The army officer who brought me to her people said I was being traded as punishment for loving the wrong woman. But Aiyana treated me like a king from the very first day, and I spent every day of our life together trying to be worthy of being her husband. That's what real love looks like, not the desperate passion of youth that burns bright and dies quickly, but the steady flame that burns for a lifetime, the daily choice to honor and cherish someone even when times are difficult, the commitment to grow together rather than apart as the years pass by. True love doesn't depend on society's approval or matching backgrounds or any of the shallow things people think matter. It depends on finding someone whose soul speaks to yours, and having the courage to build a life together no matter what obstacles the world puts in your path.